My name is Isabel Tran, and last week, I stood on a stage in New York City watching my company once dismissed as just another app, officially valued at $40 million. Cameras flashed, journalists cheered, and my team cried. But the only sound I remember was the silence of the people who should have been there. A week earlier, my mother had texted, "We're too busy helping your sister's business. We can't come to your event." No anger, no surprise, just the same familiar ache of being the child they never looked for. That night, I made a promise. If they wouldn't come to my table, I'd build my own. And when the headlines broke, and the world finally saw me, all I could think was they'll never understand what it took to get here. And if you're listening to this now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family on the most important day of your life? Tell me where you're watching from. Because sometimes, being overlooked is exactly what pushes you to build your own stage. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and where dreams are supposed to fit neatly inside the limits of what's familiar. My parents owned a small family shop on Main Street, an old-fashioned store that sold household goods and crafts. They believed in tradition, in stability, in the idea that women should stay close to home, help the family, maybe get married, and keep life simple. My sister, Zelda, was everything that small town adored. She was charming, effortlessly social, always surrounded by laughter and light. She could talk to anyone, convince anyone, and for as long as I can remember, she was the pride of our family. "That's my Zelda," my father would beam whenever she entered a room. She was the golden child, radiant, graceful, and always front and center. And then there was me, quiet, analytical, with a mind that never stopped taking things apart just to understand how they worked. While other girls in school practiced makeup tutorials, I was prying open broken radios to see what made the wires hum. At 12, I built my first computer from discarded parts that a neighbor was throwing out. The day it powered on and flickered blue, I ran to show my mother, expecting at least a smile, a moment of pride. She barely looked up from the fabric she was folding and said, "That's nice, honey, but can you help your sister set up her display for the weekend fair? She's behind schedule." That was the first time I realized that in our family, there were two kinds of effort, hers which was celebrated, and mine which was inconvenient. I didn't argue. I just went upstairs, sat beside my old desk, and stared at the glow of the computer screen. The machine purred softly, almost like it understood. That hum became the sound of my escape. A few years later, when I won first place at a regional science fair, my mother's reaction was almost identical. She said, "That's good, Isabel, but maybe next time pick something more feminine. You don't want people to think you're strange." She smiled like it was advice. My father, meanwhile, was out helping Zelda prepare for her latest pop-up event. It was always her business, her booth, her big day. When Zelda started her handmade crafts shop, Zelda's Creations, the entire family rallied behind her. Dad built the wooden sign. Mom stayed up nights sewing tablecloths. Neighbors dropped by to wish her luck. And me? I sat in my room soldering microchips for my final high school robotics project, the air heavy with the smell of burned plastic and loneliness. No one asked how it was going. It didn't make me jealous, not exactly. It made me invisible. In our home, attention was a currency, and I was broke. I remember watching them load boxes into the truck for Zelda's first big market fair, my father telling her, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. You've got the family spirit." And then he glanced at me, his tone soft but dismissive. "You'll help her, won't you? You're good at that technical stuff." I nodded, because that's what the other daughter was supposed to do, help. As the years passed, the roles hardened like cement. Zelda became the extrovert success story the town adored, smiling in every photo, her business plastered across the local newspaper. My parents clipped every article and pinned them proudly on the refrigerator. Once, I noticed a corner of my own photo from the science competition wedged behind one of Zelda's features, the edge curling from neglect. I didn't move it. Somehow, it felt fitting, like I was meant to exist in the blurred background of someone else's spotlight. Still, I kept building. I coded late at night on an old desktop, teaching myself through online forums, fascinated by how logic could create order in ways people rarely could. Circuits made sense. Wires didn't lie. If you connected them properly, they worked. Unlike love, unlike family. But the more I created, the more the divide grew. My mother once told a neighbor at church, "Zelda's our business mind." Isabel's, well, she's into those computer things. Not really her world, but we love her anyway. That anyway stayed with me for years. It was a small word, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. I learned to stop expecting applause. At birthdays, my father would toast Zelda's new contracts while I quietly sliced the cake. At family dinners, my mother would beam as Zelda spoke about her latest supplier from California, while I sat there wondering if anyone noticed I'd been offered a scholarship to a top engineering camp. They didn't. When the acceptance letter from Columbia University arrived, it came folded inside a thin, white envelope with my name typed neatly across the front. I still remember holding it under the warm kitchen light, my hands trembling as I read the words, "Congratulations, full scholarship." For a moment, the world went silent. All the years of late-night coding, the quiet hours in the garage surrounded by humming machines, had finally amounted to something tangible. I turned toward my parents, expecting maybe a flicker of pride, or at least a smile. Instead, my father sighed and said, "New York is far, Isabel. It's not the kind of place for someone like you." My mother added, "And Zelda needs help managing the shop. You'd be abandoning your family if you go." Oh, that word abandoning stuck to me like glue. They made it sound as though chasing my future was betrayal. But deep down, I knew staying would mean something far worse, slowly erasing myself to keep them comfortable. So I packed my things into one worn suitcase, took the early morning bus, and left without looking back. The bus rolled past the borders of Pennsylvania into New York, and as the skyline began to rise in the distance, I whispered to myself, "This is where I start over." New York was everything home wasn't: noisy, unpredictable, alive. My dorm room at Columbia was barely the size of my old bedroom closet, the radiator clanging all night, but it was mine. For the first time, I had a door I could close and a silence that belonged only to me. I worked part-time at a cafe on Amsterdam Avenue, steaming milk for strangers during the day and coding small freelance projects at night. Money was tight, so dinner was often a mix of instant noodles and cheap black coffee, but each night I went to bed exhausted and proud because every dollar was earned on my own. Classes were brutal, competitive in a way that made me question my worth. Most of my classmates came from families that bought them laptops before they could walk. I came with an old refurbished computer that wheezed when I compiled code. But I pushed through, staying up until 3 a.m., watching YouTube tutorials, debugging line by line until my eyes burned. It wasn't just about grades, it was about survival, about proving that even without anyone cheering me on, I could still cross the finish line. Meanwhile, Zelda's name kept filling my phone. Photos of her standing in front of her store, ribbons and balloons behind her. Family group texts flooded with congratulations. "So proud of you, sweetie. We always knew you'd make it big." I scrolled through them one night from my dorm bed, spooning half-cooked ramen straight from the pot, and saw a video of her grand opening. My parents were there, smiling so wide they looked younger. Even the mayor of our small town came. I stared at the tiny screen until the image blurred, the smell of artificial seasoning mixing with the faint ache of being forgotten. I didn't cry. I just turned off the video and opened my laptop. If home had taught me that my silence didn't matter, New York taught me how powerful it could be. I started taking on small projects for local businesses, automating inventory systems, building websites, even designing algorithms for bike delivery routes across Manhattan. Every successful line of code was like reclaiming a piece of the voice I'd lost. One night, while closing up the cafe, my manager asked why I looked so tired. I told him I was building something on the side, just a little system to track local deliveries more efficiently. He laughed, not mockingly, but with curiosity. "You might be onto something, kid," he said. I went home that night with his words ringing in my ears. Maybe I was onto something. Maybe all these lonely nights meant more than I realized. There were weekends when the loneliness hit hard, watching groups of friends head home for holidays while I stayed behind to work. On Christmas Eve my sophomore year, I video called home. Zelda answered from the family store, surrounded by customers, her voice cheerful. "Sorry, Izzy. It's crazy here. We'll call you later, okay?" The call ended in under a minute. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. Behind me, the city lights flickered through the dorm window, a constellation of possibilities. Still, in that silence, something inside me hardened, like steel forged under fire. I realized that no one was coming to rescue me. No one would hand me my place in the world. I'd have to build it line by line, brick by digital brick. By the time I reached my senior year, I'd already begun shaping my own path, a small team of 3 working on a prototype logistics platform. It wasn't much then, just a handful of spreadsheets and a crude algorithm. But it was the seed of something real, the foundation of what would later become Urban Link Systems. After graduation, I joined a small logistics startup in Manhattan. It wasn't glamorous, just a cramped office squeezed between a deli and a dry cleaner, but it was the kind of place where problems were real and solutions couldn't hide behind buzzwords. My job was simple on paper: analyze delivery data, find ways to make the system faster. In practice, it meant staying long after the lights went out, poring over endless spreadsheets, and watching trucks zigzag inefficiently across boroughs. Day after day, I saw the same pattern repeat: small neighborhood stores drowning in inefficiency. They couldn't afford high-end routing software, their data was scattered across old spreadsheets, and payments lagged behind for weeks. Every minute of delay cost them money, and for many, survival. One evening, after a 14-hour day, I sat by the office window overlooking the chaos of Canal Street. Below, a line of delivery bikes weaved through traffic, the city glowing in streaks of red and gold. I remember thinking, what if all of this, every bike, every truck, every store, could speak the same language? What if every route could adjust itself, in real time, to the pulse of the city? The thought wouldn't leave me. It grew louder, clearer. I didn't want to just fix someone else's system. I wanted to build a new one. That was the night the first spark hit. I pulled out my old laptop and began sketching the idea. A real-time local supply chain network that could connect small businesses, couriers, and suppliers into a single synchronized map. A digital nervous system for local commerce. I called it, simply, Urban Link. In the beginning, there were just 4 of us: me, my college friend Ravi, who handled back-end code, an overworked delivery dispatcher named Maria, who knew the streets better than Google Maps, and Aaron, a part-time graphic designer who believed in the dream more than the paycheck. We worked out of my tiny studio apartment in Bushwick, the one where the radiator hissed like it had opinions. Our desks were old folding tables, our whiteboard was a shower curtain taped to the wall, and our meals were mostly day-old bagels from the cafe downstairs. But none of that mattered. We had a purpose. Those first few months were brutal and electric. We coded through the night, tested in the mornings, failed by noon, and started again by lunch. I remember Maria riding her bike across Brooklyn in the rain to test our prototype tracking system, texting updates between deliveries. One time, she called laughing, saying, "Your app just told me to teleport through a building." I laughed too, exhausted but alive. Every bug fixed, every line of code that worked felt like reclaiming another inch of the world that once ignored me. When I finally called home to share the news that I had started my own company, I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I could almost hear my younger self whispering, "They'll be proud this time." But when my mother picked up, her voice was sharp, distracted. "You quit your job? Isabel, that's reckless. You should come home and help your sister. Her shop is expanding, and she could use your skills for her website or something." My father chimed in from the background, his tone clipped. "Another app? Everyone's making apps. That's not a real business. Help Zelda instead, she's building something tangible." I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't disappointment anymore, it was clarity. They would never see me the way I saw myself. I smiled into the phone, a calmness settling over me like armor. "Okay," I said quietly. "But if this works, I won't need anyone to show up at my launch. Not even you." There was silence on the line, brief, awkward, before my mother said, "Don't talk like that," and hung up. I stared at the screen for a long time, the call log still glowing, before turning back to the whiteboard. That night, I wrote one sentence at the top of our plans in thick black marker. "We build for those who are unseen." It wasn't just a mission, it was personal. Every small business owner overlooked by big corporations, every delivery driver forgotten behind the scenes, every invisible worker who kept the city alive, they were all versions of me. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion and quiet victories. We convinced 3 neighborhood bakeries to test our beta. When the system worked, cutting their delivery time by nearly 30%, it felt like magic. We'd watch the map light up with moving dots, real trucks responding in real time, and for once, the chaos of New York seemed manageable. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the dark window after everyone else had gone home, messy hair, eyes rimmed red, and think about my family's shop back in Pennsylvania. I wondered if they were proud of Zelda's newest expansion, or if they even knew what I was building here. But then I'd shake the thought off, return to my desk, and keep typing. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. While they were busy helping my sister decorate her store windows, I was quietly wiring an entire city together. The next few years passed like a blur, a long, sleepless blur made of glowing screens, half-empty coffee cups, and the hum of overworked laptops. Nights bled into mornings without warning. Some days, the city outside my apartment window looked like it was moving in fast forward while I stayed frozen in the same spot, surrounded by whiteboards covered in notes, sticky papers, and numbers that never seemed to add up. UrbanLink was alive barely. We were growing, but not fast enough. For every small win, there were 5 new problems waiting at the door. There were weeks when I barely slept 3 hours a night. We worked from the floor of my apartment until the noise of the radiator was replaced by the sound of our own typing. Every investor pitch felt like walking into a storm barefoot. We'd rehearse for days, polish every slide, and still leave the room with polite smiles that hid rejection. "Impressive technology," they'd say, "but not scalable." Or worse, "Come back when you've got traction." Traction. The word haunted me like a finish line that kept moving further away. By year 2, our bank account was gasping. Rent for the workspace was overdue, and our tiny server closet overheated so often that Maria used to joke we should just cook eggs on top of it. We weren't sure if we'd make it another month. I remember the night Ravi came to me, eyes heavy, holding a list of company assets we could liquidate: old laptops, routers, even our extra monitors. "If we sell all this, we can pay salaries for 1 more cycle," he said. My fingers were trembling around the paper, but I nodded. There was no point pretending we were fine. That night, I sat alone after everyone left, the city lights flickering through the blinds, and stared at the wall of code on my screen. I whispered to myself, if no one's coming to save us, then we save ourselves. The next morning, instead of giving up, I made one last round of calls, this time not to investors, but to potential clients. Local grocery chains, weekend farmers markets, anyone who needed better deliveries. Most didn't answer. But one did, a cooperative of urban farmers from upstate New York. They agreed to a 2-week trial. "We'll test it," the manager said, her tone skeptical. "But if it crashes, you're paying for the mess." I promised her it wouldn't. We spent 48 straight hours preparing. Ravi rewrote the dispatch API from scratch. Maria fine-tuned the delivery routes manually at 3 a.m. Aaron designed a last-minute dashboard to make it look like we'd built something more sophisticated than it was. When the trial started, I barely breathed. For the first few hours, things went wrong. Drivers lost GPS signals, some data duplicated, the app lagged under the load. But then, slowly, the numbers stabilized. The deliveries synced. Orders that used to take 4 hours started closing in under 3. At the end of the week, the cooperative manager called again. Her voice was different this time. "You know," she said, "I didn't believe you'd pull it off, but our distribution time just improved by 30%. Whatever this thing is, keep it running." I put down the phone and felt something inside me. Uncoil relief, pride, disbelief all tangled together. That moment changed everything. The cooperative's results spread by word of mouth, and soon we were fielding calls from other local markets. Within 6 months, we had 10 active clients. Within a year, that number climbed to 200. We moved out of my apartment into a modest shared office in Williamsburg. The day the first real desks arrived, Maria burst into laughter and said, "Look at us actual chairs." We built a small team: engineers, analysts, customer success reps, 50 people by the end of year 3. It wasn't Silicon Valley fancy. There were no beanbags or neon slogans on the wall. But there was purpose. Every person there believed in what we were building. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe. Our system evolved fast. What began as a crude routing app became a dynamic logistics platform capable of syncing supply and demand across entire boroughs. It could detect traffic jams, reroute couriers automatically, track inventory in real time, and even predict shortages before they happened. Small businesses that once lost money to delays were now expanding. Delivery drivers made more runs and went home earlier. The city moved smoother, a quiet, invisible rhythm we'd helped create. But success came with new challenges. Big companies started noticing us. Venture capital firms began calling. And while their tone had changed, I hadn't forgotten the months of silence when we were desperate. When the first major firm offered to lead a series around, I almost said no. But I knew we needed it to grow. So we took it carefully, on our terms. Year 5 arrived with the kind of milestone you don't dare say out loud. A top-tier fund offered $40 million in Series B financing. $40 million. The number looked surreal on paper. It wasn't luck, it was 5 years of sleepless nights and faith held together by caffeine and stubbornness. When the deal closed, the investors celebrated at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Manhattan. I remember standing by the railing, the skyline glittering below, champagne sweating in my hand. People around me were talking about expansion, valuation, partnerships, words that used to feel unreachable. And yet, the only thing I could think about was how quiet my phone was. No messages from home. No, congratulations. No, we're proud of you. I had told them nothing. Not about the contracts, the funding, or the dozens of employees who looked to me every morning for direction. Because some part of me wanted my silence to be louder than any speech I could give. They had chosen not to show up when it mattered. So now, I wouldn't hand them the story when it was finally beautiful. That night, I looked out over the city and smiled. They don't know yet. I whispered to myself. But they will. A week before the launch, I finally let myself do something I hadn't done in years. I invited my family. I spent hours crafting the invitation myself. It wasn't some generic email blast or a flashy PR card designed by the marketing team. It was simple, elegant navy and silver, embossed with the Urban Link logo. At the bottom, in clean white letters, it read, "Founding CEO, Isabel Tran." For a moment, I stared at that line longer than I should have. It wasn't vanity. It was proof that all those sleepless nights, all those quiet sacrifices, had led somewhere real. I sent it out on a Thursday morning with a note that said, "Would love to have you there. It's an important day for me." Short, polite, hopeful in a way I didn't want to admit. Then I waited. 3 days passed. No calls, no replies. No emoji reaction in the family group chat. I tried to convince myself they were just busy, that maybe Zelda's store was having another sale or planning some event. But on the fourth morning, my phone lit up with a single text from my mother. No greeting, no warmth. Just words that felt strangely familiar, like history looping back on itself. "We're too busy helping your sister's business. We can't come." I read it once. Then again. And a third time, slower, as if reading it differently might change its meaning. It didn't. For a long minute, I just sat there, phone in hand, surrounded by the soft hum of the office people laughing, printers running, phones ringing. My whole team was finalizing details for the event: lighting, catering, the press list. Outside the glass walls, the Manhattan skyline gleamed against the afternoon Sunday. It was supposed to be one of the happiest weeks of my life. Yet, in that tiny message, I felt the ghost of every time I had been told, "Not now, not important, maybe next time." But this time, something inside me didn't break. It went still. I typed back a single word: enjoy. No punctuation. No explanation. Just that. Then I turned off the screen, slid the phone face down, and got back to work. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. Just a quiet certainty, like the final click of a lock I'd been trying to close for years. For the first time, I wasn't the one being excluded. They had chosen to step out of my story. I was the one who finally stopped asking them to stay. That night, as I walked home through the city, the streets buzzed with life: taxis honking, people laughing, music spilling from rooftop bars. I passed a shop window displaying glittering dresses for the upcoming holiday season. My reflection stared back at me, framed by lights, and I caught myself smiling, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood. There was a time I would have begged for them to come. I would have rewritten my entire schedule, rearranged everything just to make it easier for them to show up. But not anymore. I had built something they never believed I could, and I didn't need their presence to validate it. The people who mattered: my team, my mentors, the small business owners who trusted me they would be there. They were the ones who had shown up when no one else did. The following morning, my assistant walked in with a clipboard and said, "Press confirmations are in. Bloomberg, TechCrunch, and CityWire are attending. Also, the mayor's office RSVP'd." I nodded, pretending to stay focused on logistics, but inside, I could feel the irony burning warm in my chest. The very event my parents dismissed as just another app thing was about to light up the screens of the entire city. Later that evening, when the building emptied, I stood alone in the middle of the stage at Brooklyn Navy Yard, the same one I'd rented months ago, back when it still felt like a dream. The stage lights glowed softly, painting everything in gold. I imagined the room full of people, the buzz of conversation, the cameras flashing. Then I pictured an empty chair, the one I'd reserved for family. It would stay that way. The launch day was drawing near, and the old warehouse we had rented in Brooklyn was slowly transforming into something that looked nothing like its past. Once filled with dust and forgotten machinery, it now gleamed under soft amber lights. The exposed brick walls had been polished to a dark sheen, and a massive LED screen stood center stage, pulsing with the rhythmic glow of the Urban Link Systems logo. Around it, a team of engineers moved like clockwork, checking every cable, every panel. Above, long strings of warm light bulbs draped from steel beams like constellations, giving the entire space a cinematic warmth, half industrial grit, half miracle. From the mezzanine balcony, I watched it all unfold, the quiet chaos of success coming to life. The LED screen blinked with real-time maps, showing delivery routes across New York, tiny glowing dots zipping through Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens. Every line, every flicker of data represented someone's livelihood: a baker, a florist, a bike courier, all now connected through the system I had once dreamed up in a one-room apartment. The stage crew was testing the final visuals when the words, "efficiency rate, 99.4%, appeared on the display. A small ripple of applause echoed through the room. My chest tightened not from nerves but from awe. It was surreal to see years of sleepless coding, rejections, and exhaustion turned into something tangible, something alive. That evening, when most people went home, I stayed behind. The room was silent except for the hum of the lights and the distant rumble of the subway beneath Brooklyn's concrete. I sat at a long table near the back, surrounded by stacks of cream-colored envelopes. Each one was a handwritten invitation. Not the digital kind we'd sent to press and investors, but the ones that mattered to me, the ones that would never make headlines. The first was addressed to Professor Lin, my old computer science mentor at Columbia, the man who once stayed after class to help me debug a broken algorithm when everyone else had left. He had said, "Someday you'll build something bigger than this classroom." I smiled as I wrote his name. The second was for Ravi, my co-founder, who had believed in my idea when it was nothing more than a sketch on a napkin. The next was for Maria, the bike courier who once tested Urban Link's prototype in the rain, soaking wet and laughing. Then came Aaron, our designer, who once stayed awake 3 nights straight to fix a glitch that nearly cost us our first client. But the envelopes didn't stop with my team. There was one for Mrs. Delgado, the woman who owned the tiny Cuban cafe below my first apartment. On nights when I couldn't afford dinner, she would slide a plate of rice and beans across the counter with a smile and say, "You'll pay me back when you make it." I had tried to once, years later, but she refused. "Just make it count," she said. So this time, I wrote on the card, "You did feed me, Mrs. Delgado, more than you knew." By the time I sealed the last envelope, my hands were trembling from exhaustion, but my heart was steady. These were the people who showed up when no one else did. They deserved to see the lights, the screens, the applause. This event wasn't just a product launch, it was a thank you letter written in data and light. The next morning, as I left the venue, the sky over Brooklyn was tinted with pink and orange, the skyline stretching like a promise. My phone buzzed in my pocket group messages from relatives back home. Photos came through. Zelda's new banner being hung above the front of her store. It read in bold gold letters, "Grand reopening of Zelda's craft boutique." The caption from my mother, "So proud of your sister. She's worked so hard for this." I stood there on the corner of Kent Avenue, phone in hand, the cold wind brushing my face. For a second, I could almost hear their laughter from miles away, the sound of scissors snipping ribbon, of neighbors clapping. It wasn't envy I felt, not anymore. Just distance. A vast, quiet distance between the world they lived in and the one I had built for myself. That night, I returned to the warehouse again. It was empty now, waiting for the big day. I stood alone in front of the giant LED screen. It wasn't displaying the maps anymore, only a single glowing word, "Tomorrow." I imagined how it would look when the doors opened, guests filling the space, cameras flashing, the sound of applause bouncing off the steel beams. Somewhere in the crowd would be Mrs. Delgado, Professor Lin, Maria, and Ravi, the people who had stood with me when I had nothing. There would be laughter, glasses clinking, maybe even tears. And I knew that no matter how bright the lights shone, one truth would stay at the center of it all. I didn't build this company to prove my family wrong. I built it so I could stop needing to prove anything at all. Later that evening, I leaned against the window, watching the city breathe under its endless web of lights. Somewhere, my sister's little shop was closing for the night, the banner glowing faintly under a small town lamppost. Here, the skyline pulsed with a different rhythm, a rhythm of ambition, of persistence, of dreams too loud to stay quiet. Night fell over Brooklyn like a velvet curtain pulled slow and deliberate. From the rooftop terrace of the renovated warehouse, the Manhattan skyline shimmered in the distance, a constellation of windows and steel. Inside, the space hummed with anticipation. Soft jazz played beneath the chatter of investors, reporters, and entrepreneurs mingling around trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. The faint scent of cedar and polished metal lingered in the air, the last traces of the building's industrial past. Above the stage, The Urban Link Systems logo glowed white against a deep blue backdrop. Every pixel, every light, every sound check had been rehearsed down to the second. As I stood backstage, the soft murmur of voices grew louder. My palms were cold despite the heat of the spotlights. Out in the audience, I spotted familiar faces, Professor Lin smiling proudly from the front row, Maria whispering excitedly to Ravi, Aaron double-checking the lighting cues on his tablet. And then, near the center aisle, a face that made my breath hitch. Grandma. She was smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a soft wool coat, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes bright as they found mine. She had come the only one from my family who did. I didn't have time to process it before the lights dimmed and the MC walked on stage, his voice echoing through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the official launch of Urban Link Systems, a company redefining the pulse of modern logistics. Please welcome the founder and CEO, Isabel Tran. Applause erupted sudden, thunderous, alive. I stepped into the light. For the first time, it didn't feel blinding. It felt earned. The heat of the stage lights touched my face as I walked to the podium. My heels clicked softly against the wooden platform, a rhythm steady enough to match my heartbeat. The LED wall behind me lit up with the words, "Connecting what matters." I took a slow breath, gripped the sides of the podium, and looked out at the faces staring back, hundreds of them, but for once, I wasn't shrinking. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. When I first started Urban Link, all I had was an idea and a second-hand laptop that overheated if I opened too many tabs. A ripple of laughter passed through the audience. I was told that small businesses couldn't compete with big chains, that local delivery would never be efficient, that people like me, people without family connections or funding, should play it safe. But I didn't want to play it safe. I paused, glancing toward the glowing city visible through the tall warehouse windows. This platform is for every small shop that was told they were too small to matter. For every courier who worked through storms just to make a delivery on time. For every woman who built something from nothing and was told she should help someone else instead. As I spoke, my eyes flicked briefly toward Grandma. She was wiping at her eyes, a small, proud smile trembling on her lips. The sight nearly undid me. But I kept going. Urban Link isn't just software. It's a heartbeat, one that connects neighborhoods, businesses, and people who keep this city alive. Tonight, we're turning that heartbeat into a signal that never stops. Applause thundered through the space, warm and resonant. My chest rose with it, not pride, but release. Then came the moment we'd rehearsed for weeks. The lights dimmed again. On the massive LED wall behind me, live data began to stream, a glowing map of New York City. Little blue dots moved along bright white lines, delivery vehicles in motion, all synced to our system. "This," I said softly into the mic, "is happening right now." That. Gasps rippled through the audience as the routes on screen shifted in real time. A small cluster of dots blinked red near the Brooklyn Bridge, signaling congestion. Instantly, the system rerouted them across the Williamsburg Bridge, optimizing for speed. Within seconds, their status turned green again. The animation looked almost like veins carrying light through a living organism. Cameras flashed. The sound of shutters filled the air as reporters pushed forward for photos. Someone from the mayor's office whispered, "That's incredible," while an investor muttered, "Real time rerouting across boroughs, this changes everything." I stepped back, letting the map glow behind me. The faces lit by the screen were awestruck, and for once I didn't look for approval. I simply let myself stand there, at the center of it all, and breathe. Then I felt a hand, gentle, trembling, slip into mine. I turned. Grandma had come up beside me, her eyes glistening under the golden lights. She leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You've done it, Isabel," she whispered. "You've written your own story, one no one else can erase." My throat tightened. I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for showing up, Grandma." She smiled softly. "Someone had to witness the truth." The crowd erupted again as the system's final demonstration completed flawlessly. The LED screen burst into color routes expanding across the map like fireworks of data. Flashbulbs flared, investors clapped, reporters shouted questions, and for the first time in my life, I didn't step aside. I didn't let anyone else take the microphone, or the credit, or the spotlight. In that instant, I realized something simple but profound. This was what it felt like to belong not at a family table, but on a stage I had built with my own hands. The applause washed over me, a sound so full and steady it drowned out every echo of the past. No one was interrupting. No one was speaking over me. No one was telling me to step back and help my sister. Just me, the lights, and the truth blazing across every screen in the room. The morning after the launch felt unreal, the kind of quiet that follows a storm you've waited your whole life to weather. Sunlight poured into my Soho apartment through the tall warehouse windows, cutting long lines across the floor. Empty champagne glasses and scattered printouts still covered the marble counter. My voice was gone from the night before, but my mind was wide awake. Then the buzzing started. At first it was one vibration. Then two. Then a steady, relentless stream. My phone lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, news alerts. TechCrunch. $40M raised to revolutionize local commerce. Urban Link Systems leads a new era for small businesses. Bloomberg. The woman rewiring New York's supply chain. Forbes. From obscurity to innovation. Isabel Tran's 5-year journey to the top. I stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. There it was, everything I had worked for, everything I had once whispered into the dark. Not a dream, not a secret, it was real. The whole country knew my name now. Then came the ringtone. A number I hadn't seen in months. I didn't have to look twice, Dad. For a moment, I just let it ring, watching his name blink on the glass. Then, slowly, I picked up. Isabel, his voice rushed in, louder than I remembered. We just saw the news, the articles, the interviews, everything. You built a company worth $40 million? Why didn't you tell us? The whole town's talking about it. Oh. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, the phone pressed loosely to my ear. I did tell you, I said quietly. You just never listened. There was a pause, the kind that carries the weight of years. I heard rustling, then another voice joined the line. Mom. Sweetheart, she started, her tone thin and hesitant. We thought you were still doing freelance work or consulting or something. You never said you had investors or employees or, goodness, a launch event. Why didn't you tell us earlier? I almost laughed. Not bitterly, just softly, like someone who had finally run out of reasons to explain. I sent you invitations, I said. Multiple times, but you were busy, helping Zelda with her business, remember? The silence that followed wasn't the defensive kind I was used to. It was quiet, raw. Like they had just seen a reflection they didn't recognize. Then came the voice I'd been waiting for. From the background, calm, steady, and unmistakable. Grandma. She had stayed the night in my guest room after the launch. Now, she appeared at the edge of the kitchen, her robe loosely tied, her silver hair glowing in the soft morning light. I turned on the speaker and set the phone on the counter. She didn't even wait for me to say a word. Robert. Judy. Her voice was firm, clear, the kind that could silence an entire room. Do you realize what you've done all these years? Mother, my father began, but she cut him off. No. You listen this time. The girl invited you over and over to the biggest moments of her life. You ignored her because you thought helping Zelda's little shop was more important. You've spent years choosing who you think deserves your attention. And last night, the country made its choice for you. On the other end, I heard a faint inhale. My mother's voice trembled slightly. Mom, please, we didn't mean to. You didn't mean to, Grandma interrupted. But you did. You made her invisible. While she was out there building something that helps thousands of families, you were hanging banners for one daughter and forgetting the other even existed. You called her stubborn for leaving, ungrateful for succeeding, but the truth is, she became everything you never had the eyes to see. The only sound after that was static, that faint electrical hiss that fills silence when no one knows what to say. I swallowed, glancing out the window. Below, New York was waking up, delivery vans crossing bridges, vendors opening shops, trucks rerouting through Urban Link's platform in real time. My world was moving forward, even as theirs stood still. "Dad," I said finally, my voice soft but unwavering. "I don't blame you. Not anymore. But I stopped waiting for you to show up. I stopped trying to fit into a story where I was only background noise." There was another long silence. I could hear my mother's breath catch, like she wanted to cry but didn't know how. Then Grandma's voice came again, quieter now but still sharp as glass. "You should have been there last night. You should have seen the lights, the screens, the people she helped. You should have heard the way the crowd cheered when her name appeared. It was beautiful. And not one of you can ever say you made that possible." "I do." The line crackled, that small, electrical flicker that sounds almost like fire catching wire. It hissed faintly, like the sound of a microphone burning out. Then my father whispered, barely audible, "We're proud of you, Isabel." I closed my eyes. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But for once, I didn't need to care. "Thank you," I said quietly, and ended the call. The phone went still, the apartment falling silent again except for the sound of coffee dripping in the kitchen. Grandma came closer, set her hand on my shoulder, and smiled the same way she did last night, full of pride and a little sorrow. "Don't carry their guilt, child," she said softly. "You already carried the weight of being unseen long enough. Let them sit with the silence they made." Outside, the sun caught the edges of the skyline, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless, like every light in the city had shifted, just slightly, to face me. By late afternoon, the city felt different. Not louder, just more awake, as if every screen, every billboard, every subway ad had learned my name overnight. My phone wouldn't stop lighting up. Mentions, tags, reposts. The clip of my speech had gone viral, shared by tech pages, business magazines, even local community accounts. The caption everywhere was the same. For every small shop that was told they were too small to matter. That one line had struck a chord. I watched the view counter climb past 2 million, then 5. My inbox overflowed with messages from old classmates, former bosses, and strangers saying they finally felt seen. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of notifications. Outside, the sky over Soho had begun to tint pink, fading into that golden haze before evening. I made tea, trying to steady the quiet pride in my chest, when another vibration shook the counter. This time, it wasn't a headline. It was a message from Zelda. "The news is everywhere." I didn't think it was this big. For a while, I just looked at it. The dots appeared, typing, pausing, typing again, then stopped. I could almost hear the hesitation in her silence. Years of being the center of every conversation, and now she didn't know what to say. I typed back slowly. "It always was. Nothing more. Just that, simple, calm, and true." I put the phone down and turned toward the window. Across the East River, the skyline shimmered like a field of gold. I thought about all the times I had watched that same view from a bus window years ago, wondering if I'd ever matter in a city this big. And now, the city itself was whispering my name through every glowing screen. That evening, my team decided to throw a celebration, nothing fancy, just something real. We gathered in our Brooklyn office, the one with wide glass windows overlooking the Williamsburg Bridge. Pizza boxes were stacked on the counter, champagne bottles lined up beside empty coffee mugs. Someone dimmed the lights and connected a speaker, filling the room with soft 80 seconds music. Ravi raised a glass first. "To 5 years of caffeine, chaos, and code that refused to work until the last minute," he said, grinning. "To Isabel, for never letting us give up even when she probably wanted to." Laughter rippled through the room. Maria clinked her glass against mine and added, to the woman who proved that silence doesn't mean surrender. We all drank, the bubbles fizzing like electricity on the tongue. Someone opened a laptop and played clips from the event, my speech, the applause, the live map lighting up. Every time the crowd cheered, my team shouted louder, like it was happening all over again. Then, during a lull between songs, I looked around the room. Some were eating, others talking in small groups, their laughter echoing off the glass. The reflection of the city lights shimmered on their faces, ordinary people who had built something extraordinary. And I realized, this was my family now. I leaned back against the window, glass in hand, and exhaled a long breath I hadn't known I'd been holding for years. The kind that carries everything you've been waiting to release: anger, exhaustion, and a strange, quiet peace. For most of my life, I had been chasing one thing: recognition. Not fame, not fortune. Just the simple act of being seen. Every time my parents ignored my achievements or compared me to Zelda, I had told myself that if I could just succeed loud enough, they'd finally look my way. But now, standing there surrounded by the people who believed in me long before the headlines did, I finally understood something deeper. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't even need their apology. Because silence, I had learned, is its own kind of confession. As the night wore on, I slipped out onto the balcony, where the wind carried the low hum of the city below. Traffic lights blinked, ferries cut across the dark water, and in the distance, the Williamsburg Bridge glowed like a trail of fire. I took one last sip of champagne and whispered, more to myself than anyone else, they didn't come, but maybe that was the point. Oh. Behind me, my team broke into a loud cheer as someone spilled soda on the floor. I laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing into the night. The city didn't care who hadn't shown up, it only cared that I had. A week later, after the noise had quieted and the articles began to fade beneath newer headlines, I decided to do something that surprised even me. I invited my parents and Zelda to dinner. Not to a restaurant, not to my apartment, and not to make amends in the way they might have expected. I invited them to the office, the place where my story had truly begun. No reporters. No cameras. No applause. Just a quiet table in the middle of the workspace that used to echo with late-night typing and the sound of exhaustion. When they arrived, I was already there, setting the last of the wine glasses in place. The lights were dimmed to a warm gold, the windows framing the New York skyline glittering, alive, infinite. My father walked in first, glancing around the open floor plan, his shoes soft against the polished concrete. My mother followed behind, slower, her eyes scanning every detail: the clean lines of the desks, the faint hum of servers in the corner, the wall-sized digital map still showing delivery routes across the city. Zelda came last, her hair tucked neatly behind her ear, wearing the same expression she always had: composed, unreadable. No one spoke for a while. Then my mother broke the silence, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "It's different from what I imagined," she said, her eyes drifting to the panoramic window where Manhattan burned orange under the sunset. "I thought offices like this only existed in magazines." Objection. My father chuckled lightly, the kind of laugh people use when they're uncomfortable but trying to seem supportive. "I suppose," he said, "I never quite understood what you were building. I read about the system in the papers, but seeing it like this, maybe I didn't see it all." I smiled faintly and gestured for them to sit. "That's okay," I said. "You weren't supposed to see it then. I needed to build it without needing your permission." Zelda stayed quiet. She traced the edge of her glass with one finger, her eyes moving between the skyline and the glowing monitors across the room. When she finally spoke, it wasn't defensive or dismissive. It was just quiet. "Congratulations, sis," she said. "You really did it." I looked at her, searching her face for the usual condescension. But there was none. Maybe she finally saw me, or maybe she just ran out of reasons not to. Either way, I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "But I don't need congratulations. Not this time." The words hung in the air, gentle but unshakable. I poured the wine and continued, my voice calm. For years, I waited for someone to make space for me at the dinner table, in conversation, in this family. But I don't wait anymore. I've built my own table. And anyone who comes now comes because they want to, not because they're supposed to. My mother looked down, folding her napkin over and over in her hands. My father took a slow sip of wine. Zelda glanced at me again, but this time she didn't look away. Maybe that's what you were supposed to do all along, she said quietly. Dinner was simple roasted salmon, salad, bread still warm from the bakery downstairs. There was no speech, no argument, just the soft clinking of forks and the faint sound of the city through the glass. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like truth, fragile, but real. When the plates were cleared, my mother spoke again, her eyes fixed on the skyline. I don't know if we can fix everything, she said. But I do know that we see you now. Maybe not the way we should have before, but we do. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded, because there were no perfect words left to say. The past couldn't be rewritten, but it could finally stop echoing. When they stood to leave, my father turned at the door. You've done well, Isabel, he said softly. Better than any of us could have imagined. After they were gone, I walked back to the window. The skyline shimmered, bridges lit like veins of gold across the dark. My reflection stared back at me, calm, whole, free. I pressed my palm lightly against the glass and spoke, my voice barely above a whisper, the kind of words meant for anyone who's ever felt small. You don't need anyone to witness your worth to make it real, I said. You can build your own stage and invite only those who show up with their hearts open. The city lights flickered in rhythm with the words, as if agreeing. I thought of every time I had been dismissed, every night I had worked in silence, every empty seat I'd saved hoping someone would fill it. None of it hurt anymore. Because the lights, the laughter of my team downstairs, the quiet hum of servers still working, this was my applause. And maybe that's all recognition really is, not the noise of others, but the moment you realize you've already earned your piece. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the window, and whispered one last line for the little girl I once was, the one who used to sit alone in the garage with broken wires and bigger dreams. If you've ever been forgotten, remember this: their silence isn't your ending. It's just the backdrop for the sound you were born to make.